My name is Eleanor. I am 70 years old, and until 3 days ago, my own son believed I was a helpless old woman he could manipulate however he wanted. He had no idea how wrong he was. When Ethan broke the index finger on my right hand because I refused to co-sign a $200,000 loan for the new house for Jessica, my daughter-in-law, he thought he had broken me. He thought the pain and humiliation would make me give in. But what he didn't know is that in that exact moment, while I was crying and pretending to be destroyed, I was already planning his downfall. And when we went to the bank the next day and he saw what appeared on the computer screen, he was completely paralyzed because he discovered that his mother was not the poor old woman he thought he knew. Allow me to tell you how we got here. I am a woman who has perfected the art of going unnoticed. For years, after my husband's death 5 years ago, I carefully cultivated the image of the fragile widow everyone expected to see. I dress in discreet clothing, always in shades of gray or brown, never anything flashy. I walk a little slower than necessary. I let my voice tremble slightly when I talk about important things, and I always carry my cane, even though I don't really need it. It's all part of the perfect disguise. My house is modest, my car is old, and when my neighbors see me, they whisper among themselves about poor Eleanor who lives on a meager Social Security check. I've heard their comments. What a shame. So alone, she must be struggling. Her children should help her more. If they knew the truth, they would be speechless. But this appearance of vulnerability is not accidental. It is a strategy I have built meticulously, because I have learned that when people underestimate you, they make mistakes, and the mistakes of others become my power. I live in a small, 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. I handle my own affairs with trembling hands that are actually steady as steel, and when my children visit, I always behave like the devoted mother who lives for them. I cook for them. I give them money when they ask to borrow it money. I know they will never pay back, and I listen patiently to their problems while nodding my head like an understanding old woman. All the while, I observe, analyze, and file away every detail of their true intentions. Ethan, my eldest son, is 35 and has always been ambitious, but in that dangerous way where ambition isn't accompanied by hard work or real intelligence. He married Jessica 3 years ago, a 28-year-old woman who, from the first day, looked at me as if I were an obstacle on her path to a better life. She is one of those people who smiles while stabbing you, who hugs you while calculating how much you are worth. During these 3 years, I have watched as they both developed a strange relationship with me. On one hand, they treated me with that feigned condescension reserved for the elderly, but on the other hand, they were always calculating, measuring, subtly asking about my financial situation. Ethan and Jessica's visits became more frequent in recent months, but not because they were concerned about my well-being. They would arrive with cheap cupcakes from the grocery store, feign interest in my health, and then, inevitably, the conversation would drift to money. "Mom, are you sure you're okay financially?" Ethan would ask me with that voice pretending concern. "You should think about the future, about what will happen when you can't take care of yourself," Jessica would add, stroking my hand with a tenderness that made me nauseous because I could see the falsehood behind her eyes. I would nod weakly, sigh as if the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and murmur things like, "Oh, kids, I don't know what I would do without you." During these months, I perfected my performance. I complained of imaginary aches, mentioned bills that worried me, talked about how expensive life was. I even left some bills unpaid on purpose for them to see when they came to visit. I wanted them to completely believe that I was a burden, a deteriorating old woman who depended on their kindness. And it worked perfectly. Their gazes became more greedy, their questions more direct, and their intentions more obvious. But what they didn't know is that every word, every gesture, every insinuation was being recorded in my memory as evidence for the perfect moment. The decisive moment came exactly 1 week ago. A Tuesday afternoon I will never forget. Ethan and Jessica arrived at my house with a smile that didn't reach their eyes and a folder full of papers they carried under their arm as if it were a treasure. "Mom, we have wonderful news," Jessica announced with that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something important. "We found the house of our dreams." They sat in my small living room, on that worn-out sofa I have kept on purpose to reinforce my image of a woman with few resources, and they spread out photographs of a spectacular mansion in one of the most exclusive gated communities in the city. "Look at this beauty, Mom," Ethan said as he passed the photos one by one, as if he were hypnotizing me. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a huge yard, a pool, a 2-car garage. It's perfect for starting a big family. Jessica nodded vigorously and added details that sounded rehearsed. "And it has a downstairs bedroom that would be perfect for you, Mom. You could come live with us. You'd be so much better taken care of." The way she said it made me understand immediately that this room would be more like my golden prison, the place where they would keep me controlled while they decided what to do with me and my money. For 20 minutes, I listened to their perfectly coordinated presentation. They talked about mortgages, interest rates, unique opportunities that couldn't be missed. "It's a steal, Mom," Ethan insisted. "Normally, a house like this would cost $300,000, but because of problems with the previous seller, we got it for $200,000. Andrea chimed in. "We just need a co-signer with a good credit history, someone trustworthy, and we immediately thought of you." The trap was so well constructed that I almost felt like applauding their performance. I pretended to be overwhelmed by the information, as would be expected of an old woman who supposedly didn't understand complicated finances. "I don't know, kids," I mumbled with a trembling voice. "This co-signing business sounds very serious. What does it mean exactly?" Ethan moved closer, taking my hands in his with a false tenderness that churned my stomach, and explained with that condescending patience used with children. "It means that if for some reason we couldn't pay, you would be responsible for us. But that's never going to happen, Mom. I have a stable job, Jessica works too, we have everything calculated." "But what if something goes wrong?" I asked, perfectly playing the part of the worried old woman. "What would happen to my house, to my things?" Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Ethan, one of those looks they thought I didn't notice, but that I caught perfectly. "Oh, Mom, nothing bad is going to happen," Jessica replied with a nervous laugh. "Besides, think of it this way. If something terrible and unthinkable were to happen, we would take complete care of you. You would never want for anything." It was their elegant way of telling me that if things went wrong, they would take everything I have and make me their total dependent. That night, after they left promising to come back the next day to help me better understand the papers, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and analyzed every word of the conversation. It wasn't just a simple financial scam. It was a much more sophisticated plan. First, they would make me a co-signer for a property that probably cost much more than they said. Second, once I signed, they would find a way to deliberately default on the loan. Third, when the bank came for my house to cover the debt, they would appear as my saviors, offering to take care of me in their new mansion while they took everything I had built over a lifetime of work. It was a brilliant plan, I must admit, but they had one problem. They completely underestimated their victim. During the next 3 days, while they believed I was considering their generous proposal, I was doing my own research. I called Victoria, my trusted lawyer, a brilliant 40-year-old woman who handles my most important legal affairs and is one of the few people who knows my true financial situation. "Victoria," I said over the phone, "I need you to investigate a property and 2 people. I think they're trying to scam me." I also contacted Thomas, a discreet private investigator Victoria had recommended years ago for another matter. "Thomas, I need you to follow my son and my daughter-in-law. I want to know exactly what they're doing, who they're meeting with, what papers they're handling, and I want it to be completely confidential." In 48 hours, I had a complete file on the scam they were planning. The house existed, yes, but it cost $280,000, not $200,000. Ethan and Jessica had agreed with the seller to pocket the difference. Furthermore, they had been meeting with a real estate attorney who had explained to them exactly how the foreclosure process works. On Friday night, when they returned for the final conversation, I had everything ready for my own performance. I made them coffee, served homemade cookies, and behaved like the perfect grandmother who had finally made a decision. "Kids," I said with a trembling but determined voice, "I've thought a lot about what you told me. And you're right, you've always taken care of me. You've always been there for me." Their faces lit up immediately. But, I continued, it's a very big decision for an old woman like me. I need to read all the papers calmly, understand every word. It was then that Ethan's mask began to slip. Mom, we already explained everything. There's nothing complicated to understand. You just need to sign here and here, he said, pointing to the marked lines on the documents. His tone was no longer that of a patient son. There was an urgency, a pressure that hadn't been there before. Jessica became more nervous. It's just that the seller is pressuring us, Eleanor. If we don't close the deal this weekend, we could lose the house. Lie after lie, pressure after pressure. I understand the urgency, kids, I replied, keeping my voice soft. But I can't see these small numbers well. Let me go get my reading glasses. I got up slowly, as any old woman would, and walked to my bedroom. But instead of looking for glasses, I took my phone and sent a pre-written text message. It started. Activate the plan. When I returned to the living room, they were whispering to each other, clearly discussing strategies to pressure me more. When I returned to the living room with my glasses on, the tension in the air had completely changed. Ethan and Jessica had stopped whispering, but I could see in their eyes that ill-disguised impatience that scammers have when they feel their victim is slipping away. I sat down slowly in my favorite chair, that old rocking chair that squeaks a little, and began to review the papers with the exaggerated meticulousness of an old woman who supposedly understands nothing about finance. Let's see. It says here that the property is worth $200,000, I murmured, bringing the papers close to my eyes as if it were difficult to read. But down here there are other numbers I don't understand. Ethan immediately came over, with that forced smile that no longer fooled anyone. Mom, those are technical numbers from the bank, taxes, and fees. You don't have to worry about that. But I kept insisting, perfectly playing the role of the confused old woman. It's just that I don't understand why it says one amount here and another here. In my day, when your father and I bought this house, the numbers were clearer. Andrea intervened with that syrupy voice that I was sick of. Oh, Eleanor, everything is more complicated now because of government regulations. The important thing is that we take care of everything. For the next 30 minutes, I maintained that dance of pretending to read, asking innocent questions, and showing myself to be overwhelmed by the complexity of the documents. But every question I asked was strategic, designed to make them reveal more details of their plan. And if you get divorced? I asked suddenly, as if it were a concern that had just occurred to me. What would happen to the house? And to me as a co-signer? The question took them by surprise. Ethan stammered. Mom, why would you say that? We're doing great. But Andrea looked at me with a coldness that confirmed my suspicions. There was no real trust even between them. I kept pressing with seemingly naive but devastatingly precise questions. What if one of you loses your job? What if you get sick? What if there's an economic crisis like the one we had a few years ago? With each question, their answers became more vague, more evasive, more desperate. It was like watching two bad actors trying to improvise a script that was falling apart in their hands. Mom, you can't live thinking about everything bad that could happen, Ethan said. And for the first time, I heard real irritation in his voice. You have to trust us. That's when I decided to play my first strong card. Kids, I said with a broken voice. I'm scared. I'm a lonely old woman, and if something goes wrong, what will become of me? I allowed tears to well up in my eyes. Real tears, because even though I was acting, the betrayal of my own son hurt me deep in my heart. This house is all I have. If I lose it, I'll be on the street. It was the perfect moment for any real son to comfort me, to hug me, to assure me that he would never leave me helpless. But Ethan did none of that. Instead, he stood up abruptly and began pacing my small living room like a caged animal. Mom, you're being ridiculous. We're offering you the chance to live in a beautiful house, to be cared for, to be part of something better. His voice had risen in volume, and there was no trace of the feigned patience left. But you always have to complicate things. You always have to be so negative. Andrea tried to calm him, but I could see the panic in her eyes. They realized their perfect plan was crumbling. It was then that Jessica changed tactics and decided to play the emotional card. She approached my chair, knelt beside me, and took my hands with a tenderness so false it made me want to pull away immediately. "Eleanor," she said in a soft voice, "I understand your fears. It's normal for a woman your age to feel insecure." Every word was calculated to sound motherly, but the effect was the opposite. "But think of it this way. We are your family. Ethan is your son, your blood. Do you really think we would hurt you?" It was perfect psychological manipulation, using my maternal love against me. "Besides," Jessica continued, "think of the grandchildren you could have. In that big house, you could have your own garden, your own room with a private bathroom. You could spend your final years surrounded by family, not here alone in this old house that needs more repairs every day." It was cruel how she used my loneliness and my age as weapons against me. But what she didn't know was that every word was being recorded by the tiny device Victoria had installed in my locket, a necklace that looked like a simple piece of old lady's jewelry, but was actually state-of-the-art technology. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, as if I were deeply considering her words. Then I sighed deeply, as if I had made a painful but necessary decision. "You're right," I finally murmured. "I'm a silly old woman who gets scared of everything. You are my family. You're all I have in this world." I saw their faces relax immediately, saw them exchange triumphant glances. They thought they had won. "But," I added, raising a trembling finger, "I need one more night to think about it. It's a very big decision for my old head." Ethan was about to protest, but Jessica put a hand on his arm to stop him. She was smarter. She knew that pushing too hard could ruin everything. "Of course, Eleanor," she said with a radiant smile. "Take all the time you need. But remember that the opportunity won't last forever." That night, after they left, I immediately called Victoria. "I have everything I need from this first phase," I said. "The recordings are perfect. Now I need you to prepare the second part of the plan." Victoria, who knew my true nature much better than my own children, laughed softly on the phone. "Eleanor, sometimes you scare me, but it also gives me great satisfaction to see you give these scammers what they deserve." The next day, Saturday morning, I sent a text message to Ethan and Jessica. "Kids, I've made my decision. I'm ready to sign. Come whenever you can." The reply came in less than 5 minutes. "Perfect, Mom. We'll be there in an hour." So exciting. I could imagine their jubilant faces, their celebratory hugs, their feeling of total victory. If they had known what really awaited them, they would have run in the opposite direction. I spent that hour preparing meticulously. I put on my oldest gray dress, the one that made me look especially frail and helpless. I did my hair carelessly, as an old woman who no longer cares about her appearance would. I even practiced my hand tremor and my hesitant walk. But inside, I was more alert and stronger than ever. I was like a hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. When Ethan and Jessica arrived that Saturday morning, they brought with them a euphoric energy that was almost comical. They entered my house like conquerors coming to claim their territory, carrying folders, special pens, and even a bottle of cheap champagne to celebrate. "Mom, what a beautiful day," Ethan exclaimed with a smile that reached from ear to ear. "It's the perfect day to change our lives for the better." Jessica was wearing a bright red dress she had never worn in my presence before, as if she wanted to celebrate her victory in advance. I behaved exactly as they expected, the nervous but resigned old woman who had finally made the right decision. "Oh, kids," I said with a trembling voice as I led them into the living room. "I didn't sleep a wink last night thinking about all this. But you're right. You know more about these modern things than I do." I served them coffee in my oldest cups, the chipped porcelain ones I had specifically reserved for this occasion, reinforcing my image of a woman with few resources and many worries. Ethan spread the documents on my coffee table with the ceremony of someone about to sign a historic treaty. "Look, Mom, everything is perfectly organized here. You just need to sign on these 3 pages that I've already marked with an X." He pointed to the lines with a golden pen he had surely bought, especially for the occasion. "It's very simple, just your name and the date. In less than 5 minutes, it will all be done." Jessica added with that syrupy voice I was completely sick of. "And then we can go celebrate with a nice lunch. What do you think?" I took the first document with hands I pretended were trembling and began to read slowly, moving my lips like old people do when they concentrate hard. "Let's see," I mumbled. "It says here that I commit to." "Oh, kids!" These complicated words make me dizzy. It was a perfect performance of an old woman overwhelmed by legal jargon, but in reality, I was reading every clause with the precision of an experienced lawyer. And what I saw confirmed all my suspicions. It wasn't just a simple co-signing, but a total guarantee that included all my present and future assets. "Mom, you don't need to read all that," Ethan interrupted with an impatience he could no longer completely hide. "Trust us. We already went over everything with our lawyer. It's standard, completely normal." But I continued my charade, pointing to specific paragraphs and asking questions that sounded naive but were actually devastatingly precise. "It says something here about real and personal property. What does that mean exactly? Does it also mean my personal things?" Jessica exchanged a nervous glance with Ethan before answering. No, Eleanor. That's just a legal formality. It only refers to the house. Nothing else." Lie number 53. But who was counting anymore? "Besides," she added with a forced laugh, "it won't even be necessary to use that clause because we're going to pay everything religiously." Ethan nodded vigorously. "Exactly, Mom. It's just a paper the bank asks for, but nothing bad will ever happen." I kept pretending to read for another 10 minutes, making dramatic pauses and worried sighs, until I finally declared, "Well, kids, if you say it's okay, then it must be okay." I took the pen with a hand I exaggeratedly trembled and approached the first document. But just as I was about to sign, I stopped abruptly. "Oh, how silly of me," I exclaimed, as if I had just remembered something crucial. "I can't sign without my good reading glasses. These ones I have on are for seeing far away." Ethan huffed with barely contained frustration. "Mom, you've already reviewed everything. You don't need other glasses to sign your name." But I was already slowly rising from my chair, perfectly playing the part of an old woman obsessed with details. No, son. My doctor always tells me that to read small print I need my special glasses. Give me a minute." I headed to my bedroom with slow, hesitant steps, listening to their desperate whispers behind me. Once in my room, I acted quickly. I sent a coded text message to Victoria. "The fish are in the net." I also activated the second recorder I had hidden in my purse, because I knew what was coming next would be the most crucial part of all the evidence. When I returned to the living room with my special glasses, which were actually exactly the same as the ones I already had on, I found Ethan nervously pacing back and forth, while Jessica compulsively checked her phone. "Sorry for the delay, kids," I said in my sweetest, most elderly voice. "You know how us old folks are with our quirks." I sat down again and took the pen, approaching the first document. But then, as if it were a completely spontaneous thought, I looked up and looked at them with eyes full of feigned maternal love. "Before I sign," I said softly, "can you promise me something?" Their faces tensed immediately, as if sensing something was wrong. "What is it, Mom?" Ethan asked cautiously. "Promise me," I continued, my voice cracking with feigned emotion, "that if anything goes wrong, if you have trouble paying, you'll tell me immediately. I don't want you to suffer in silence, trying to protect me." It was the perfect trap. Any real child would have used that moment to genuinely reassure their mother, to assure her they would never let her down. But these two scammers fell right into my net. Jessica was the first to respond, and her words were like pure gold for my recording. "Oh, Eleanor, of course. But the truth is, if we did run into trouble, you'd be much better off living with us in the new house than here alone." Ethan complimented the statement with a brutal honesty that chilled my blood. "Exactly, Mom, and if for some reason we had to use your house as collateral, we'd take complete care of you. We'd give you a place to live and you'd never lack food or care." There it was, the full confession of their real intentions. Not only did they plan to use my house as collateral knowing they couldn't pay, but they had already calculated turning me into their total dependent once they took everything from me. It was a diabolical plan of slavery disguised as filial love. But I maintained my expression of an old woman moved by their generosity and murmured, "Oh, kids, you're so good to me. I don't know what I'd do without you." Finally, with great ceremony and feigned trembling hands, I signed the first document, then the second. And when I got to the third, the most important one, the one that made me fully responsible for the debt, I made a dramatic pause. "This last paper looks more complicated," I observed. "Are you sure it's necessary?" The desperation in their eyes was almost palpable. "Yes, Mom," they said almost in unison. "It's the most important one of all." I signed the third document as well, and the moment I put the date, Ethan and Jessica literally sighed with relief. "Done!" Ethan exclaimed, gathering the papers as if they were winning lottery tickets. "It's all settled." Jessica hugged me with an effusiveness that made me nauseous. "Eleanor, you're the best mother-in-law in the world. You don't know the happiness you've given us." They even opened the bottle of cheap champagne and poured 3 glasses, toasting to the bright future that awaited us all. For the next 30 minutes, they kept up a euphoric conversation about the plans for the new house, about what my room would be like, about the family parties we were going to have. It was all a lie, of course, but I let them fantasize while I mentally reviewed every element of my counterattack. When they finally left, carrying the signed documents like trophies of war, I waved goodbye from the door with tears in my eyes and a trembling smile. "God bless you, kids. I hope everything works out." The moment their car disappeared around the corner, my expression changed completely. I went into my house, locked the door, and went straight to the phone. "Victoria," I said when she answered, "it's all done. I have the signatures, I have the recordings, and I have the confessions of their real intentions." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Victoria laughed with that laugh she reserved for moments of absolute legal triumph. "Eleanor, you are a dangerous woman. I feel sorry for your son, but he brought this on himself." The next 3 days were a masterpiece of patience and strategic planning. While Ethan and Jessica celebrated their supposed victory, running around doing bank paperwork and bragging to their friends about their upcoming mansion, I moved silently like a spider weaving the perfect web. Every morning I woke up with a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years, knowing that for the first time in a long time, I was in complete control of the game board. On Monday morning, Victoria came to my house disguised as a government social worker. She carried an official-looking binder, a fake ID, and the bored attitude of someone making routine visits to senior citizens. If anyone had seen her, they would have thought she was just another bureaucrat doing welfare checks. But in reality, we were refining every detail of my revenge. "The recordings are perfect," she informed me, while reviewing the audio on her device. "You have explicit confessions of fraud, emotional manipulation, and premeditated plans to strip you of your assets." Victoria had worked all night preparing a file that would make any prosecutor tremble. "Look at this," she said, showing me high-resolution photographs that Thomas had taken of Ethan and Jessica meeting with their accomplice attorney. "We have them entering and leaving the law firm 3 times in 2 weeks, always with documents related to foreclosures." She also had copies of text messages between them that Thomas had legally obtained through contacts at the phone companies. The messages were devastating. They talked about me as the old fool, calculated how long it would take to get rid of her, and even discussed plans to sell my belongings. "But this is just the appetizer," Victoria continued, with a smile that sent shivers of satisfaction down my spine. "The real surprise comes tomorrow at the bank." She explained that she had been working with the bank manager, a man named Robert, who had been a college classmate of Victoria's and had an impeccable reputation in the financial industry. Robert is outraged by the situation. He says he's seen many cases of financial abuse against the elderly, but never one so blatantly planned as this. On Tuesday afternoon, I received the call I had been waiting for. It was Ethan, his voice trying to sound casual but unable to hide his nervousness. "Mom, we need you to come to the bank tomorrow to finalize some papers. It's just a formality, but your presence is required." I feigned the appropriate confusion. "More papers, son? I thought we were done with all that on Saturday." His response was evasive. Yes, but the bank needs to confirm some details with you directly. It's standard protocol." I could hear Jessica in the background, whispering instructions I couldn't quite make out. That night I couldn't sleep, but not from anxiety, from pure anticipation. It was like Christmas Eve, But instead of presents, I was going to get justice. I got up early, dressed carefully in my most convincing old lady clothes, practiced my expressions of confusion and my hesitant walk. I even put on a little makeup to look paler and more fragile. Every detail was important, because I knew this would be the most crucial performance of my life. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, Ethan arrived to pick me up. He came alone, because, as he explained, Jessica had an important doctor's appointment she couldn't cancel. An obvious lie. She was probably too nervous to face what they believed would be the final formality of their scam. During the drive to the bank, Ethan tried to prepare me for what was coming. "Mom, the manager is going to ask you some questions about your financial situation. Just answer honestly. Don't try to impress anyone or hide anything." "What kind of questions, son?" I asked in an innocent voice. "Oh, normal stuff. How much money you have saved, if you have other debts, if you understand the responsibilities of being a co-signer. It's bank protocol, nothing personal." What Ethan didn't know was that those questions were exactly the ones I had suggested to Robert, designed specifically to create the perfect moment for my revelation. "And if I don't know how to answer a question?" I pressed. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll be there to help you with anything you don't understand." When we arrived at the bank, Robert was waiting for us in his office. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with that authoritative presence that inspires immediate confidence. His office was perfectly arranged for the occasion. Organized documents, computer on, and an atmosphere of professional seriousness that made Ethan visibly more nervous. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." Robert greeted me with perfect courtesy. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you." The meeting began routinely, with Robert explaining the terms of the loan and the responsibilities of a co-signer. I perfectly played the part of the overwhelmed but cooperative old woman, asking basic questions and showing appropriate confusion at the technical terms. Ethan constantly intervened, trying to speed up the process and minimize any complications. "Mom understands everything perfectly," he would say whenever I paused to process the information. It was then that Robert asked the crucial question. "Mrs. Eleanor, to complete this process, I need to verify your current financial situation. Could you provide me with information about your bank accounts and assets?" Ethan tensed immediately. "Is that really necessary?" he asked. "She's a simple retiree. She doesn't have much to declare." Robert looked at him with a seriousness that would have intimidated anyone. "Sir, when someone becomes a co-signer for such a significant amount, the bank is required by law to verify their actual financial capacity." "Of course," I replied with a trembling voice, pretending to be nervous about having to reveal my modest resources. "I don't have much, but I can show you what I have." I took an old, faded passbook savings account from my purse, the same one I had used for years to maintain my charade of poverty. "This is my main account," I said, handing it to Robert with hands I feigned were shaking. "Everything I have is in there." Robert took the passbook and opened it ceremoniously. For a few seconds that felt like an eternity, he studied the numbers in silence. Then he looked up at his computer and began typing. Ethan leaned forward, trying to see the numbers, but from his angle, he couldn't make anything out clearly. "Interesting," Robert murmured after a few moments. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you sure this is your only bank account?" "Yes, sir," I replied with perfect innocence. "Why? Is there a problem?" Robert looked at me over his glasses with an expression that mixed professional surprise with something that looked like admiration. "There's no problem, ma'am. In fact, it's quite the opposite." He turned to his computer and swiveled the screen so both Ethan and I could see it clearly. "According to our records, you have accounts at 3 different banks with a combined total balance of approximately $2.8 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan was completely paralyzed, his mouth agape and his eyes fixed on the screen as if he were seeing a ghost. The numbers were there, clear and incontrovertible. Account after account, investment after investment, a fortune he had never imagined existed. "Furthermore," Robert continued, clearly enjoying the moment, "you have investment properties in 2 different states, a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, and a trust established 5 years ago that generates a passive income of approximately $15,000 a month. But, Ethan stammered. Mom, you always said you lived on a meager pension. You complained about the bills, about not having enough money. His voice broke on the last word, as if he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. Robert intervened with a professional smile that had a dangerous edge. Sir, your mother is what we call a discreet investor. There are many older people who prefer to maintain a low profile regarding their true financial situation. I maintained my expression of a confused old woman, as if I didn't understand why everyone seemed so surprised. Have I done something wrong? I asked in a small voice. It's just that my late husband always told me it was better not to show off the money one has. Robert nodded sympathetically. Your husband was a very wise man, Mrs. Eleanor. Financial discretion is a virtue that few practice today. The expression on Ethan's face was an epic poem of shock, disbelief, and growing horror. His eyes darted from the computer screen to my face, trying to process the information he had just received as if it were an alien language. Mom, he finally whispered, in a voice that sounded like it came from beyond the grave. You knew about all this money. I maintained my innocent old woman act to the end. Oh, honey, of course I knew. But your father always told me that you don't go around talking about money in public. It's bad manners. Robert, who was obviously enjoying every second of the revelation, continued reading from his screen with the meticulousness of a public accountant. I also see here that you have certificates of deposit worth $500,000 maturing next year, and an overseas investment account that, well, I'd rather not mention the specific numbers for privacy, but let's just say it's considerable. Every word was like a hammer blow to Ethan's head, who had gone from total euphoria to absolute desperation in a matter of minutes. But then, Ethan managed to articulate after several failed attempts. Why did you live as if you had no money? Why did you complain about the bills? Why did you borrow money for house repairs? His voice had risen an octave, like a teenager confronting his parents over a perceived injustice. It was pathetic to see him like this, but also extraordinarily satisfying. Oh, my love, I replied with that infinite patience reserved for small children. It's because your father taught me that the best way to know people is to see how they behave when they think you have nothing to offer them. The blow was devastating and precise. I saw the full understanding of what I had been doing for years finally penetrate his brain. It wasn't just that I had money. It was that I had been testing him, evaluating his character, measuring his genuine filial love versus his greed, and he had failed spectacularly on every test. For these past few years, I continued in a soft but relentless voice. I have been waiting for one of my children to visit me simply because they love me, not because they need something from me. Robert, who had been perfectly briefed by Victoria on the exact timing of each revelation, chose that moment to introduce the next element of our strategy. Mr. Ethan, he said in a professional tone but with an unmistakable subtext of reproach, given your mother's real financial circumstances, I must ask, are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with this loan? The question sounded innocent, but it was loaded with implications. If Ethan had any emotional intelligence, this was the perfect moment to back down, apologize, and try to salvage something of his relationship with me. But Ethan had no emotional intelligence. Instead, he had pure greed and desperation. Of course we want to proceed, he replied with an aggressiveness that surprised even Robert. My mother has already signed all the papers. She has agreed to be the co-signer. His voice had taken on a defensive and slightly threatening tone, as if Robert were the enemy trying to stand between him and his prize. Besides, if she has so much money, then there's no risk for anyone, right? It was the perfect answer for my purposes. Instead of showing remorse for trying to scam me, or gratitude for discovering his mother was not the destitute old woman he believed, Ethan had chosen to double down. He had publicly confirmed, in front of an official witness from the bank, that he knew exactly what he was doing and had no intention of stopping. You're right, son, I said with a smile that he interpreted as maternal submission, but was actually pure predatory satisfaction. There's no risk for anyone. Robert then proceeded with the most delicious part of the whole plan. Very well, then let's complete the process, he announced, pulling a new folder from his desk. Mr. Ethan, I need you to sign these additional documents." Ethan, still reeling from the revelation about my fortune, took the papers without reading them carefully. If he had been smarter, he would have noticed that among the documents were sworn affidavits about his intentions, liability waivers, and most importantly, authorizations for the bank to record all our conversations as part of its fraud prevention protocol. "What are these papers?" he asked, distractedly, as he signed page after page. "Standard bank protocol," Robert replied with the authority of someone who has handled thousands of similar transactions. "Declarations of good faith, confirmations that you understand the terms of the loan, authorization for additional credit checks." Every signature Ethan put on those documents was another nail in his own legal coffin, but he was too overwhelmed by greed and confusion to realize it. When we finished with the paperwork, Robert escorted us to the door of his office with perfect professional courtesy, and Mrs. "Eleanor," he said, taking my hand in his with a respect that was completely genuine, "it has been a true honor to meet you. Your husband must have been a very intelligent man to have taught you so much about finance and discretion." Then he turned to Ethan with an expression that had subtly changed. "Sir, I hope you appreciate the blessing you have in such an exceptional mother." During the drive back to my house, Ethan drove in a silence that was almost physical in its intensity. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to process not only the information about my fortune, but also the implications of what had just happened. Finally, when we were 2 blocks from my house, he exploded. "Mom, I can't believe you lied to me all these years. I thought you were struggling financially. I was worried about you." "You were worried about me?" I asked, my voice maintaining its soft tone but having acquired an edge he had never heard before. "Is that why you came with Jessica to pressure me into co-signing for a house you can't afford? Is that why you broke my finger when I initially refused? That was your way of showing concern." It was the first time in this whole charade that I had directly mentioned his physical aggression, and the effect was immediate. Ethan turned as white as a ghost. "Mom, I was very stressed. I didn't mean to hurt you." His voice disintegrated into pathetic stutters. "Besides, I thought you really needed our help, that being alone in that old house wasn't good for you." Each excuse sounded more desperate than the last. "And Jessica and I thought that living with us would give you a better quality of life in your final years." "My final years?" I repeated slowly, savoring the words. "You've already decided for me how much time I have left." The car stopped in front of my house, but neither of us made a move to get out. "Ethan," I continued, and for the first time in years I used his full name instead of son or my love. "Do you really think I didn't notice that your visits increased when you started having financial problems? Do you think I didn't notice that Jessica started asking questions about my will and my properties? The confrontation I had been avoiding for months was finally happening, but now I held all the cards. Do you think I'm so foolish as to not realize that you two were planning something when you started talking about houses, loans, and the convenience of me living cared for by you?" Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but I continued relentlessly. "And did you really think that a woman who managed to build a fortune of almost $3 million wouldn't notice when her own children tried to scam her?" The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, Ethan found his voice, but when he spoke, he sounded like a child caught in a lie. "Mom, we never wanted to scam you. We just thought that it would be better for everyone if—" "If what, Ethan?" I interrupted him. "If you stole my house? If you turned me into your dependent? If you took away my independence and my dignity so that you could live in a mansion you haven't earned?" The truth was finally on the table, raw and unadorned. Ethan completely collapsed, resting his head on the steering wheel like a defeated man. "I didn't know what to do," he mumbled. "Jessica and I have so many debts, so many problems. I thought that if you had that house, and if something happened, we could take care of you and take everything I have." I finished the sentence for him. "Yes, Ethan, I understand perfectly what you thought." I got out of the car with the serene dignity of a queen who has just witnessed a traitor's confession. Ethan remained seated, clutching the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. "Mom, wait," he shouted as I headed for my front door. "We need to talk about this. We need to fix things." I stopped without turning to look at him and replied with a voice colder than January ice. There's nothing left to fix, Ethan. You made your choice when you decided your mother was an obstacle to be removed instead of a person to be loved. I entered my house and closed the door, but not with the dramatic slam he expected. It was a definitive, final closure, like the sound of a tomb being sealed forever. From my window, I watched him stay there for almost 10 minutes, probably waiting for me to come out to comfort him, to forgive him, to behave like the devoted mother I had always been. But that woman had died the moment he broke my finger. The woman who remained was someone completely different. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I dialed Victoria's number. Phase 1 is complete, I informed her. I have his full confession recorded in the car. I have his shock documented in the face of my real finances, and I have his confirmation that he will proceed with the scam despite knowing the truth. Victoria laughed that scary laugh of hers. Eleanor, you're more ruthless than any lawyer I know. Now comes the really fun part. For the next 48 hours, Ethan and Jessica lived in a bubble of denial and self-deception that was fascinating to observe. Thomas, my private investigator, kept me informed of all their movements. They had decided to proceed with the purchase of the house as if nothing had happened, as if the discovery of my fortune was simply an interesting but irrelevant detail to their plans. They're acting like they won the lottery, Thomas reported. Yesterday they went to an expensive furniture store and spent $4,000 on a living room set, all on credit. On Thursday morning, Jessica had the audacity to call me. Her voice was a toxic mix of false concern and calculated manipulation. Eleanor, I'm so worried about you. Ethan came home very upset after the visit to the bank. He says you're angry with us. I feigned perfect confusion. Angry? No, honey, I'm not angry. I'm just surprised that you want to proceed with buying the house now that you know I'm not the poor old woman you thought I was. Jessica stammered for a few seconds before replying. It's just that, Eleanor, the money doesn't change anything between us. We love you the same, whether you have a lot or a little. It was such a blatant lie that I almost wanted to applaud her audacity. Of course, dear, I replied with venomous sweetness. True love isn't measured in money. That's why I'm sure that if I were really poor like you believed, you would have loved and cared for me exactly the same, right? The question left her speechless, because we both knew the real answer. If I had genuinely been the destitute old woman they thought, they would have never offered me a room in their new mansion. They would have let me rot in my old house while they enjoyed their upgraded life. Of course we would, she finally managed to say, but her voice sounded as hollow as an empty drum. We've always been willing to take care of you. On Friday evening, I received a visit I had been expecting. It was Ethan, but this time he came alone, and with a completely different expression. He was no longer the manipulative, aggressive son of the previous days. Now he was a desperate man who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. Mom, he said from the doorway, can we talk? Please. His voice was that of a scared child, not the adult who had broken his own mother's finger. I let him in, but this time I didn't offer him coffee or cookies. I didn't point to the sofa or make any gesture of maternal hospitality. I simply sat in my favorite chair and waited for him to speak first. Mom, he began with a broken voice, I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I hurt you, I lied to you, I tried to take advantage of you. Each word came out as if it were tearing pieces from his soul. But you need to understand, I was desperate. Jessica and I have huge debts. We're about to lose our apartment, and I thought that you... You thought what, Ethan? I interrupted him with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Did you think I was a stupid old woman you could manipulate? Did you think that after you broke my finger, I'd be so scared I'd sign anything? Or did you think that after years of pretending to love me only when you needed money, I wouldn't realize your true intentions? Each question was a verbal slap, and he flinched with each one. No, Mom, I do love you, he protested weakly. I've always loved you. It's just that the circumstances, I repeated with infinite contempt. Ethan, for the last 5 years, since your father died, you have visited me exactly 23 times. And on 21 of those visits, you ended up asking to borrow money. Do you really want me to believe that's love? The numbers were devastatingly precise because I had kept an exact count of every interaction. "But I always intended to pay you back," he said with growing desperation. "Things have been tough, but I always thought that when my situation improved—" "Ethan," I interrupted again, "you have borrowed $18,400 in 5 years. You have never paid back a single cent. You have never asked me how I'm really doing, what I need, if I'm lonely or scared. You only show up when your credit card is maxed out." The silence that followed was painful for both of us, but for completely different reasons. He suffered because he finally understood how he had failed as a son. I suffered because I had finally verbalized years of accumulated pain and disappointment. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked with a broken voice. "How can I fix this?" It was the question I had been waiting for, because his answer would determine if there was any microscopic chance of salvation for him. "I want you," I said slowly, "to cancel the purchase of that house immediately." His face fell as if I had asked him to cut off his own arm. "I want you to tell Jessica the truth about what you were really planning to do to me." He turned even paler, if that was possible. "And I want you to seek professional help for your financial problems instead of trying to steal from your mother." Each demand was reasonable and feasible, but to him, they sounded like death sentences. "Mom, you can't ask me to do that," he protested, with a desperation bordering on hysteria. "We've already signed contracts. We've made plans. Jessica has already told her whole family about the new house. If we cancel now, we lose the entire down payment. We lose the opportunity. And Jessica." He stopped abruptly, realizing what he had just revealed. He wasn't worried about hurting me. He was worried about disappointing Jessica and his public image. "Ah," I said with a smile that must have been scarier than any scream. "I see. Your real concern isn't that you betrayed me. Your real concern is that Jessica will realize you're not the successful man she thought she married." It was the final blow, the revelation that even in his moment of supposed contrition, he was still fundamentally selfish. Ethan stood up abruptly from his chair, and for a terrible moment, I thought he was going to become violent as he had the week before. But instead, he headed for the door with the hesitant steps of a drunkard. "This isn't over, Mom," he muttered without looking at me. "You signed those papers. You are the official co-signer on our loan. If we can't pay, the bank will come after you, and then you're going to need our help." It was a direct threat, the final confirmation that there was no real repentance, only resentment for being caught. "You're right, Ethan," I replied with a calm that surprised even me. "This isn't over. But it's not going to end the way you expect." When the door closed behind him, I sat in the darkness of my living room, feeling a strange mixture of deep sadness and fierce satisfaction. The motherly part of me mourned the son I had lost forever, but the warrior part of me prepared for the final battle. On Monday morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, my phone rang with the punctuality of a Swiss watch. It was Victoria, and her voice had that electric quality it gets when she's about to unleash a legal storm of epic proportions. "Eleanor," she said without preamble, "it's time to show your son what it really means to go up against a woman who knows power." Her tone was not that of a lawyer speaking to her client. It was that of a general coordinating the final attack. Over the weekend, while Ethan and Jessica prematurely celebrated what they believed was their definitive victory, Victoria and her team had worked like ants, building a case that would be remembered in legal circles for years. "We have everything," she informed me with evident satisfaction. The audio recordings of their confessions, Thomas's photographs documenting their meetings with accomplices, copies of all the fraudulent documents, witness testimonies, and even medical records of your broken finger confirming the physical assault. But the pièce de résistance of our legal arsenal was something not even Ethan could have imagined in his worst nightmares. "Remember I told you there was something more?" Victoria continued with an audible smile in her voice. "It turns out the house they're trying to buy has a complicated legal history. The seller doesn't have a clean title to the property. There are 2 pending lawsuits related to structural problems. And the most beautiful part of all, the real market price isn't $200,000 or $280,000. It's $140,000. The information landed like a nuclear bomb on my understanding of the whole plan. Not only were Ethan and Jessica trying to scam me, but they were also being scammed by the seller and probably by their own lawyer. It was a chain of deceit where each link thought they were taking advantage of the next, not realizing they would all end up destroyed. This means, I calculated quickly, that they're going to overpay by $140,000 for a property that is legally not worth owning. Exactly, Victoria confirmed. And since you're the co-signer, you would technically be responsible not only for the fraudulent loan amount, but also for all the legal claims associated with the property. It's a financial disaster that could easily cost $500,000 or more in the long run. It was the perfect plan to completely destroy any victim. Not only would they lose their current house as collateral, but they would be indebted for life with endless legal problems. On Tuesday morning, I set the final phase of my revenge in motion. I called Ethan with the sweetest, most maternal voice I could muster. "Son, I've been thinking a lot about everything we talked about. I think you're right about some things." I could hear his surprise and renewed hope through the phone. "Really, Mom? You've changed your mind?" His voice was that of a child who has just been forgiven after a terrible mischief. "Yes, my love," I continued with my final master performance. "I've decided that instead of co-signing your loan, I'm going to buy the house for you directly, in cash." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that for a moment I thought the call had been disconnected. Finally, I heard his ragged breathing. "What? What did you say, Mom?" "You heard me, son. I'm going to pay the full $200,000 so you can have your house without any bank debt." The euphoria in his voice was almost comical. "Mom, you're incredible. You're the best mother in the world. I can't believe you're going to do this for us." It was pathetic how his suddenly renewed love appeared the exact moment he thought he was going to receive a free fortune. "But there's one condition," I added, and his tone immediately shifted to one of caution. "What kind of condition?" "I want us all to meet at the bank tomorrow to make the official transfer. You, Jessica, Robert the manager, and me. A full family ceremony." On Wednesday at 11 in the morning, we gathered in Robert's office as if for a family celebration. Ethan and Jessica arrived dressed as if they were going to a wedding. She in a bright green dress that screamed new money, and he in a suit he had probably bought that morning on credit. Both had that poorly disguised look of triumph that scammers have when they think they have finally pulled off their masterstroke. "Eleanor," Jessica exclaimed, hugging me with an effusiveness that made me want to vomit. "I can't believe how generous you are. You're the best mother-in-law in the world." Ethan kissed my forehead with a tenderness that had been absent for years. "Mom, this means everything to us. It means we can start a new life, start a family, be truly happy." Every word was a lie wrapped in emotional manipulation, but I let them play it out to the end. Robert, who had been perfectly instructed on his role in the final drama, received us with the solemnity appropriate for the occasion. "Mrs. Eleanor," he announced ceremoniously, "it's truly beautiful to see a mother support her family in this way. We don't witness such an extraordinary act of generosity every day." Then he turned to Ethan and Jessica. "You are very fortunate to have such a mother." Before we proceed with the transfer, I said with a voice trembling with feigned emotion, "I want to say a few words." The three of them settled into their chairs like an audience awaiting an inspirational speech. "For these past few years," I began, "I have been watching, learning, evaluating. As a mother, you always hope for the best from your children, but you must also be prepared for the worst." Ethan and Jessica nodded understandingly, thinking this was about general motherly wisdom. "Ethan," I continued, looking him directly in the eyes, "do you remember when you broke my finger because I refused to co-sign?" His face turned white as a sheet. Jessica looked at him in genuine shock. Apparently, he had never told her about his episode of physical violence. "Do you remember when you told me that if anything went wrong with the loan, I would be better off living as your dependent while you took my house?" Now Jessica was also turning pale. Robert, playing his part perfectly, frowned with professional concern. "Excuse me? There was physical violence involved in this transaction?" His tone had changed completely, from ceremonial to alarmed. "Mr. Ethan, is it true that you physically assaulted your mother to pressure her into being a co-signer?" The question hung in the air like a sword over Ethan's head. "No, it wasn't like that," Ethan stammered desperately. It was an accident, we were arguing and… But Robert was already taking official notes, and Jessica was looking at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. Mrs. Eleanor, Robert continued with growing authority, do you have medical documentation of this injury? I pulled from my purse the x-rays and the medical report that Victoria had advised me to get. Of course, I replied with deadly calm. At that moment, as if choreographed by the gods of justice, the office door opened and 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by Victoria in her most impressive suit, and a man I didn't recognize but who was obviously someone important. Good morning, Victoria announced with the authority of an attorney general. I am Mrs. Eleanor's lawyer, and these officers have arrest warrants for financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. The silence that followed was so perfect you could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Ethan and Jessica were completely frozen, like deer in the headlights of an oncoming truck. Ethan Miller and Jessica Miller, the taller officer said, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a senior citizen, extortion, and in Mr. Miller's case, physical assault against a vulnerable person. The moment the handcuffs closed around Ethan's wrists was poetically perfect. The metallic click echoed in the office like a bell of justice, and I watched his face go through all the stages of shock, denial, horror, understanding, and finally, a desperation so deep it almost made me feel pity. Almost. Mom, he yelled as the officers pulled him from his chair. This is a misunderstanding. You can't do this. I'm your son. His voice broke on the last word, as if he finally understood that argument no longer held any power over me. Jessica, for her part, had descended into a kind of hysterical breakdown that would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. This can't be happening, she shrieked while struggling uselessly with the second officer. Eleanor, you're insane. We were only trying to help you. Ethan would never hurt you. Every word she screamed only worsened their legal situation, providing additional evidence of her complicity in the plan. Victoria approached me with that smile of professional satisfaction that appears when a perfect case reaches its perfect conclusion. Eleanor, she murmured in my ear as we watched the 2 scammers being led away. This will go down in legal history as the perfect case of poetic justice. Not only did we arrest them for what they did to you, but we saved them from falling into an even bigger scam with that fraudulent property. It was true. In a delicious irony, my revenge had also been their salvation from an even worse financial disaster. The man who had entered with Victoria introduced himself as Detective Thomas Rodriguez, a specialist in crimes against the elderly. Mrs. Eleanor, he said with a genuine respect that warmed my vengeful heart, your case is going to help dozens of other victims. The recordings you obtained, the patience with which you documented every aspect of the scam, the way you allowed them to completely incriminate themselves, it's professional-level work. His words made me realize that my suffering had served a greater purpose. After Ethan and Jessica were taken away, Robert, Victoria, and I were left alone in the office. The contrast between the current tranquility and the chaos of minutes before was surreal. Now comes the really interesting part, Victoria announced, opening a folder she had brought with her. While investigating your case, we discovered that Ethan and Jessica have been running similar scams for years. You weren't their first victim, you were just their biggest. The revelation hit me like a hammer. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Victoria spread photographs and documents across Robert's desk. Jessica's mother, an 82-year-old woman with early-stage Alzheimer's, loaned them $50,000 for the down payment on their current apartment. Ethan's uncle, a 75-year-old widower, was pressured into co-signing a car loan they never paid. There was more. An elderly neighbor was loaned them $15,000 for emergency medical expenses that never existed. Jessica's godmother gave them $30,000 for a supposed family business they never started. It was a systematic pattern of exploiting senior citizens. A criminal career that had been going on for years, while I thought I simply had a son with financial problems. Robert, who had remained silent during this revelation, finally spoke. Mrs. Eleanor, what you did wasn't just protecting yourself. You stopped a criminal operation that would have continued to victimize elderly people for years." His words made me understand that my personal revenge had evolved into something much larger: real social justice. In the following weeks, as the case unfolded in the courts, I became something I had never expected to be: a national symbol of resistance. The media got hold of the story and turned it into a modern legend. The grandma who snared the scammers, 70-year-old widow proves experience, Trump's greed, the perfect revenge, how one senior citizen defeated her own conman's son. Interview requests came in an avalanche. Television producers, journalists, writers, everyone wanted to know the details of how I had managed to lay the perfect trap. But what I was most proud of was not the fame. It was the thank you calls. Seniors from all over the country contacted me to tell their own stories of financial abuse by family members, inspired by my example to fight back. 3 months after the arrest, I received a call that would change the rest of my life. It was a representative from the United States Senate, informing me that I had been selected to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for my contribution to the protection of vulnerable older adults. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said with an emotional voice, "your case has inspired legislative changes in elder protection and has given hope to thousands of victims of family abuse." The award ceremony was surreal. There I was, a 70-year-old widow who a year earlier had been feigning poverty in a modest house, standing at the main podium in Congress receiving a medal from the president himself. My speech was simple but powerful. Never underestimate the power of a woman who has decided she will no longer be a victim. Age is not weakness, it is experience. And experience, well used, is the most lethal weapon there is. But the real satisfaction came 6 months later, when Victoria informed me of the final sentences. Ethan received 5 years in prison for fraud, extortion, and assault on a senior citizen. Jessica received 4 years for complicity and conspiracy. Both were left with permanent criminal records that would make it impossible for them to ever work in any industry involving the handling of money or the care of vulnerable people. More importantly, the judge ordered that all the money they had scammed from their previous victims be returned with interest from my own funds, which I voluntarily donated. Jessica's mother with Alzheimer's got her $50,000 back, plus an additional $20,000 for her medical care. Ethan's uncle not only got his money back but received enough compensation to pay off his mortgage completely. With the remaining money from my fortune, I established the Eleanor Foundation for Elder Protection, the first organization in the country dedicated specifically to investigating, preventing, and legally pursuing family financial abuse. Victoria became the legal director, Thomas the director of investigations, and Robert the financial director. It was a perfect team of people who had seen the darkest side of human nature and had decided to fight against it. A year after the arrest, I was sitting in my new office, no bigger than my old living room, but with a view of a beautiful garden where victims of financial abuse came to receive free legal advice. On the wall hung my national medal, but also photographs of the 37 families we had helped recover over $2 million stolen by family scammers. That afternoon, while reviewing new cases, my phone rang. It was a 65-year-old woman named Martina, whose son had started pressuring her to sell her house and move into a nursing home for her own good. Her story was chillingly familiar. Visits that increased when he had financial problems, questions about her will, comments about how expensive her house was to maintain. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said with a trembling voice, "I heard your story on the radio. I think my son is trying to do the same thing yours did." "Martina," I replied, with the firm voice of someone who has walked through that fire and emerged victorious. "You've called the right place. And you've called just in time. Right now, your son thinks you're an easy victim. We're going to teach him that he is completely wrong." As I listened to the details of her situation, I felt that familiar sense of power and purpose. It was time to hunt again. Some bites are fatal, and I had become the widow who bites back.